Alright, in this video I'm going to be walking you through the changes and updates in build 20, and I'll just be going through the change log here, which you can find on the website at geopix.io/release notes. And we'll just be going briefly through most of these and touching on a few of the ones that need some examples. So without further ado, let's just dive into it. Alright, so the very first thing that was added that is of high importance is the Display Manager tool. So the Display Manager tool in GeoPix allows you to take your main viewport here, which is your main view, in addition to your surface outputs, right? So previously you had one output, but now you actually have a second one as well. So you have three total views that you can put on different monitors, and the way you do that now, instead of through the settings, which we used to have some settings over here, we still do, but these are actually not based on display assignment. These are just basically corner pinning. The way you get to this is you go to Tools and Display Manager. So Display Manager is going to reflect what Windows has in their configuration. So if I open up the display settings in Windows, you'll notice that we have the same monitor configuration that you see here over here in the Display Manager. And this is quite useful because we can simply drag our visual components over here to various outputs. So the editor, I could put it on either one of these monitors, and maybe output number 2 is going to be on this one. Perhaps I have them reversed and I just want to show output 3. And if you have more monitors attached, you can basically see them here and drag these components to any of those displays. When you're ready, you just click Set Arrangement, and that will pretty much go full screen and set things up for you. I won't do that now because it's going to screw up the video and the formatting of everything, but that's kind of how you apply the configuration that you have here. This also saves and loads with your file, so when you go to save, this is going to be saved in there, and same with loading. So if you have an automatically loading file, this will pop up for you and get taken care of on load. These over here are shortcuts or presets. So we have windowed mode, which is kind of the default mode. Full screen taskbar is going to be full screen, but it's going to let you still see your Windows taskbar at the bottom. And full screen over is actually the mode that you go into when you use multi-monitor setups like this. Full screen over is a true full screen mode, and it covers everything inside of your viewport. And if you still need to have GeoPix be on top of things that may pop up, you can turn on always on top. VSync is also still set up here from the settings, and VSync basically keeps all of your outputs in sync. So that's pretty much all there is to say about the Display Manager. It's going to be growing and evolving in the future, but right now this is how you configure your multi-monitor setups. All right, so moving on. New Artnet UI Mapper. So previously, and still of course, if you go over here into Perform and you create, let's just say make a slider, you can move this slider with your mouse, but you can also map this slider with MIDI, which is done here, or OSC, which is done here. The Artnet Mapper is essentially like the OSC Mapper in the MIDI Mapper. It's a tab, and you can also open this as a window that's floating up here, so Tools Artnet Mapper. And you use this alongside the Artnet Manager. So you configure your inputs, you see them coming in here, and once you see them here, you can go ahead and actually map things out with the Artnet Mapper. So that's all there is to say here. It's basically going to be the same workflow that you have with the other mappers, where you have mapping, target widget, style, and source channels. Okay. The next big thing I should mention is the multi-fixture Pix mode. So what this means is if you have multiple fixtures, I'll go ahead and show you this one. You can enter Pix mode with more than one fixture selected, and this is really useful if you are doing things like large fixture arrays where you want to select pixels across all of them and make masks. So if I go ahead and create a simple grid, and I will duplicate this fixture and move it over. I have two fixtures. I can go into Pix mode, and you'll notice that we have a limited tool set over here. But what we can basically do is select these Pix, and we can create masks very easily from them. The workflow for creating masks when you're in multi-Pix mode is to go to Tools, Mask Tool, and just type in a mask name. We'll call this Edge. And once you've done that, each fixture has a mask called edge, and you can see this if we go in here. So mask, edge, and you can delete this from the fixture by itself, or you can use the mask tool, which is probably going to be an easier, faster way of doing this. So that's pretty useful if you have lots of fixtures and a complex arrangement made out of many fixtures, and you want to select picks across all of them and create masks. So a very useful tool. All right. So here we have a new node in the I/O tab. Essentially, dominant frequency I/O node is going to take a FFT ramp and also a color ramp, and it's going to allow you to visualize the loudest frequency every frame by outputting a slice of the second input based on that first FFT input. So I'll go ahead and show you this. If we go over here to the I/O tab, I'm just going to put down an audio clip, just something basic for us to work with. All right, and we're going to zoom in and just turn on the play and listen. If I turn up the volume here, you'll see that we have some audio coming through. So all we need to do now is put a few more nodes down. So let's put an FFT down, which is going to be coming from our audio file or audio clip or audio source. The next thing we're going to want to do is create a dominant frequency or DOM frequency. We'll put this down. And then we want to also create a ramp, which is going to be our lookup ramp, if you will. So we'll just go ahead and edit this ramp. And let's choose a horizontal ramp. So we have, this needs to be a horizontal ramp. That's how the texture needs to be. So let's go ahead and delete some of these, and let's just go ahead and have two keys. We'll make this one red and this one blue. Maybe we'll have a third key in the middle here, green. All right, so if we plug these in here, you'll notice that our music is pulsing, and as the frequency becomes highest in a certain area, that is the slice of the texture that we take. So you'll notice when it goes green, it's because this little spike here is higher than this basically base area over here. So very useful. You can use like a remap or a lookup to look this up into a different shape, like a circular shape or a radial or anything like that. So very useful tool for doing audio reactive stuff and audio visualization. All right. So back to the release notes. Another audio related feature that was added was the ability to have audio from a macro actually come out through your audio system. So to kind of show you this, I'm going to basically just import a simple file. It's just going to be a music video. Let's see what we got here. So I've got Blockheads, the music scene here, so I'm going to drag this video in. And you can see it's playing automatically from the beginning. So we've got a bunch of new controls here, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. But let's go ahead and set a manual cue point. Let's say 0.2, 5. Okay, let's say we want to start it. We want to start the clip maybe at 15 seconds in. That seems good. We'll turn cue on macro on, and down here under audio, we'll output audio, and we can turn on listen just to hear what our audio sounds like. And the reason why we don't hear this is because our sound is on mute. All right. So we have a clip, and we've set the start point here with cue, and we've got the output audio on and listen on. So you can turn listen off. That's just for us to test with here in the I/O tab. So if we go over here and let's go ahead and create a surface object so we can see what we're doing here. So I'm going to go ahead and make some points. And we'll just do a quick projection on Z like that. And then we can pretty much just make a projector and we'll be good to go with this little test setup. So I'll do a fit scene, fit X, and scoot that back a bit. All right, we'll just select this texture here. You'll notice that our clip is playing. So with that done, we can go ahead and save a macro. So let's go ahead and open our macro tool, and we'll just go ahead and call this scene, and we'll save that. And next, let's just do a very simple macro involving a solid color. So we'll go ahead and just set red maybe here, some green, some blue. All right, and then we'll go ahead and save another macro, and we'll call this still. And the reason I'm saving this is so you can see how the audio works when you crossfade between something with audio and something without. Okay, so we're going to turn off global, and we can just disable that and turn on macro. And over here, we're going to need to set up a few things to see this. So let's do a macro bin A and a macro bin B. Let's do a viz component, and let's go ahead and turn this on, and let's just make sure we are set up here with a good camera angle, and let's also get a crossfader in here. Okay, so if we trigger scene, you'll notice that this is playing. We're going to go and put our still clip over here on the right, and we can crossfade. Everything's working just fine. And you'll notice that as we click on this, it's queuing it over from the beginning. So that option is actually built into queue on macro. If we had this off, it would actually not start the clip over. It would just start it where it is. So very useful for doing very responsive triggering. So the reason why we don't hear this is because we haven't set up our output in the audio manager. So if we go to the audio manager, we'll talk about this here in a bit. You'll notice that we have 4 inputs that are global, and we can reference these all over the I/O system. And then we also have an output channel. We have a little VU meter here. You can see that it's going up and down. But we need to actually enable the output before we hear this on our devices. For driver and device, we have it set to default, so we can just turn this on. And you'll notice that we have a left and a right channel. And we have a little preview here, so all is well. You can set the volume, buffer length. So with that said, you'll notice that we have the ability to kind of restart that clip. And as we fade to the right, the volume actually fades as well. So this allows you to take a single video clip and do some pretty interesting live editing with it. You can make several macros that cue to different parts of that same clip. And you get to hear that audio coming through your system as well. So a pretty useful feature, and one that you hopefully will have lots of interesting uses for. All right. Let's go ahead and reset and get everything back to normal here. So continuing onwards, the I/O palette now has a filter field. So this is quite a nice, useful feature, quality of life. So let's go ahead and make a few things over here. We'll just go ahead and make a handful of nodes. All right, so we have, let's say we have a projector, and we're over here trying to find our texture, and this is actually not too bad, right? But we might have 5, 10, 15 items in this list, maybe more. So what you can do now is you can go up here to filter and just start typing ramp. So I typed in R, A, and it just filters, as you expect it to in real time. You can right click on here on the filter item to actually reset this. And so this is very useful for basically filtering this down to a smaller list. All right. So we just pulled up a video clip. I'll go ahead and go back into it. We had a big overhaul for video clips and their parameters. So you'll probably experience backwards compatibility issues if you open old projects and expect them to work exactly the same. They probably won't. So let's go ahead and open a video clip. You know what? Let's go ahead and keep going with the blockhead clip. It gives us something to see that has progression in it. So starting at the top here, the general section hasn't changed. You have a new viewer flag. All nodes have this in the I/O tab. So if you turn the viewer off, this node will not cook in the background. So this is useful if you have an I/O canvas with tons of nodes and you only want to have a few of them visible at once. It kind of keeps your performance from getting too low. So we have the clip parameter. You can actually select and browse for a clip, and also additionally to that, you can now create a blank clip and you can load it manually if you'd like. So that's a little bit easier as well. So alpha, that's been the same. Repeat mode. Cycle basically means it's going to loop when it gets to the end. You can do things like mirror or go to black or 0. And to show you this, it's easiest to show you if we make a smaller subset of this clip. So we'll come back to that. Interpolate frames is very useful if you have something that's 15 frames a second or 30 and you want to get this smoothly interpolating at 60, just turn that on and it will interpolate it based on your running frame rate. Loop crossfade is in seconds how many seconds you want to fade from the end of the video to the start of the next repetition of it. So if you have a looping clip that doesn't loop seamlessly, a value of 1 is probably pretty good, maybe more, maybe less. Cue on macro, essentially you can set a cue point in your clip, and right now it's set to 0, which is the beginning, and if you click manual cue, you can see that we just reset to the start. Cue on macro, when you turn this on, as we saw before, your macros being triggered will cause the clip to restart at this position, and this is in seconds as well. So continuing on downwards, you'll see that most nodes in the IO tab have a new timing section. And for most of them you have free timeline and BPM, but for clips you just have free and timeline. So if you have something like this, I can scrub the timeline and this has no bearing on the actual clip's position, but if I set this to timeline, you'll notice that we're actually scrubbing the video. And if you're going to do anything like this where you're playing videos backwards or forwards at weird speeds, make sure you have your videos encoded as HAP-Q. It's going to help you a lot, and it will give you smooth playback forwards, backwards at pretty much any speed. So reset phase, this is basically, let's see here. Looks like this is actually not hooked up on video clips, and that makes sense. Wasn't sure if it was, but this actually has a lot of effect on other nodes, like ramp and things like that, where timing has a looping parameter. Time speed, this one's pretty straightforward. If we go ahead and play this and put this back to timeline, you'll notice that speed will increase the speed of the clip, and you can also play it backwards by putting in a negative 0.5 or something like that. This is kind of stuttering here because H.264 does not like being played backwards, but again, this is why you have HAP-Q as a format. And time offset basically takes the place of phase. So you have to enter in high values here and you'll get your time offset. Audio, if you output audio, you're going to hear it potentially in a macro. If you have this off, the clip will be visual only. Listen is just here to help you hear stuff in the viewport. So next over here we have trim. Trim is very useful. So if you have a large clip like this that's several seconds long, let's go ahead and put a time back. What you can do with trim is you can set a start and an end second in terms of where you want your clip to repeat. So let's go ahead and just set 15 and 20. So this essentially treats the clip as a 5-second clip. And if we turn on our audio, you'll hear that it repeats. And that gives you a looping clip, and you can do all kinds of things like that. The cue point will actually reset to the start of this. So if you have a cue at 0 and a trim start at 15, this is going to start you back at 15, not the beginning of the clip. So useful and very helpful when you want to make a single clip be cut up into various sections. All right, so that's all there is to really say about the new video clip parameters. Quick update on the pixel node stuff. So if you remember in the last update, it's quite a big update, we had a open source GitHub link which you can check out here. I'll go ahead and show you. Viral design GitHub. You go here and you hop over here to the Arduino pixel driver. Just take a look through here and check out the wiki if you haven't already checked this out. We have a very heavily documented system here that works for both the Teensy and the Node MCU 32 and 8266, and this is basically a pixel controller platform that's open source. You can install it, and you can use the Easy Flasher, which is a lot faster than doing things manually with the IDE, but you can do it either way. Anyways, this update pertains to interacting with the Teensy version of this, which is this one right here. So I won't go into too much detail here because I need to hook up some hardware for you to see this, but essentially, see the Pixel Node Wizard, when you scan, you're going to scan the serial and Node MCU stuff at the same time. So you can see here I have COM7. This was from last time I used my device. You can click scan, you can select your item, and then you can import that into your scene. So let's see if I can actually still import this, even though this was from a while ago. No. And that's because I haven't scanned a fresh scan. But basically, when you import a serial pixel node, you have a device object with 8 fixture objects, and each fixture object has their address offsets set up for you ahead of time. That's what's been changed in 20. This should save you a lot of headache because those offsets are based on pixels per strip, and everything should just work as soon as you import it. And all you have to do is add your own pics and your own content and get that thing going. So that's all there is to mention there. So if you're doing visualization in GeoPix, you have a couple options. So in settings, you can turn on Artnet or streaming ACN. Whoa, all right, our menu's going a little weird there. So you have these two options, and you can turn it on or off. And that essentially allows you to pass in lighting information from an outside source into GeoPix and have it map right onto your fixtures. This is pretty useful if you are trying to drive GeoPix from a lighting console, because you can still have this output directly to your LEDs, or you can use it as a visualization only tool. So it's really up to you. So basically, we've added support for streaming ACN in addition to Artnet. So all right. I told you about how you can create empty video clips in the I/O. The Pixelate node. All right, this is a quick and easy one to show you. Let me just go ahead and put down a video clip of some kind. So if we have this clip here, and let's go ahead and put down the Pixelate effects. What basically happens is you plug this in and you get your pixelated look, and you can set your resolution here, so you can get this super low res, super high res, all kinds of interesting looks you can do from that. And that's pretty much all there is to say there. Very simple node, but quite an interesting effect if you need that. Okay. So optimizations. There's a few things that have been optimized, but not too many things. The main thing to mention here is this general optimization. You don't have any device objects present. So as soon as you create a device object, now in GeoPix 20, you will have certain background processes fired up and start running. And if you have no device objects but a lot of fixtures, you're going to have a much smoother performance. And this is basically for those of you who are going to do your previs and set up your shows ahead of time. If you have no devices in your scene, you'll benefit from a slight performance increase, or maybe a big performance increase depending on how many pics you have in your scene, and that will kind of give you better performance. So when it goes time for a deployment or a show, just create your device objects, and that will become a little bit heavier because it needs to kind of bring that information back from the GPU and send it out to various devices. So a little bit of an optimization there. Okay, so there's been something useful integrated into the I/O system, and this will probably remain through changes in the next couple of months, but it's a pretty big change on its own, and this is the issue of pruning. So let's say you have a projector, and let's say you have a couple ramps. Let's go ahead and color these so you can see what's what. So we have a blue ramp and we have a green ramp. Whoops, yeah, I forgot to select that. Okay, And let's say we decide that we're going to make a macro with our blue ramp. If I save this macro with the macro tool, what basically happens, or what basically happened before, was everything in our IO graph got copied into a macro, including the projectors and the information about the projectors. And if you have 2 items, that's not too big of a deal, but if you had 10 or 20 or 30 nodes here, all those nodes you weren't even using got copied into the macro. So this was actually pretty inefficient and costed a lot of GPU memory specifically. And so what happens now, when you save a macro, the macro tool looks into the IO graph and it makes sure that the things it copies into the macro are only nodes that are connected to a projector. So in this case, if I were to save this macro, the green one would stay here in the IO graph, but the blue one would get copied and linked as it should. Furthermore, if you have a bunch of projectors in your scene, and maybe you are trying different things and you want to keep this projector, but you don't want to delete it, but you don't want it to be saved into the macro either, what you can do is you can turn the active flag to off. It's going to turn gray. And then when you save this macro, it's only going to save macro 1, projector 1, and it's only going to save the IO nodes that are attached to that. So this projector, even if it has, the green ramp attached to it, it's still not going to get saved. It's not going to get included, and neither are the IO clips attached to that. So this happens automatically behind the scenes. You don't even have to worry about it. So this should give you a lot better performance in terms of GPU memory, and also probably better performance in your launching clips and macros, because it's just not initializing so many things in the background that you may not even be using. So this is essentially going to help you a lot managing large projects and building out large macro sets without having to kind of get rid of stuff here in the IO tab. Another cool feature that I mentioned earlier is the viewer tab. So if I know I'm going to want to come back to this, but I don't want to delete it, I can just turn off the viewer, and if it's not being sourced by any projectors, it essentially stops calculating. And this is a way to keep your IO graph nice and fast while you're working, and if you want to use this again, just turn the viewer on and start doing your thing with it. Okay, so moving on. Now we move on to changes. I'm not going to really go into bug fixes because it's going to be kind of to show you these, and there's just a lot of them. I'll just kind of run through them and mention a few points. So changes, previously inside a fixture, this is a big change. You could only have up to 4,096 picks. And that was a somewhat arbitrary limit, but I've changed that now to allow a fixture to hold up to 32,000 picks. It's actually a little bit more than that, but it also depends on your GPU. So if you have a standard newer NVIDIA card, I can pretty much guarantee that that's going to be the max texture size. I think it's 32,768 or something like that. If you have an AMD card, it may be lower, it may not. I really have no experience with the AMD cards in recent years in terms of their max texture size, but either way, you probably will come nowhere near to this number. In fact, you really should not aim to have that many items in a fixture, but if you are doing extremely large scenes and you're dealing with instances specifically, you might find yourself getting to this point more easily than not. And so that's why this limit was lifted, so that people doing instancing with large arrays, they could get a lot more pixels in their scene without having, more than 128 fixtures, which is the current limit for fixtures in GeoPix. All right, so turning off visibility for surface objects. Basically, before, if you had a surface object and you turned off the display flag, it actually stayed here. You could still see it. So now that turns off as it should. We've updated the build as well for GeoPix, so now you'll notice that for every official release you're going to have a bundled installer as well as a downloader installer. And the downloader installer is what you're going to see for the experimental throughout the month because it's faster for me to upload. I can quickly iterate. But that bundled installer is what you want to take with you if you're installing GeoPix out in the field and you don't necessarily have a good internet connection. That's going to be a more self-contained download. You will still need an internet connection to get your licensing stuff sorted out if it's not already installed, but if you already have a license installed on your computer, then yeah, the bundled installer will allow you to install fully offline which might be of use to some of you. Okay, there's been another issue that several people have had issues with. So previously when you installed GeoPix, it required UAC in the beginning, but also somewhere in the middle to install the Touch Designer prerequisite. That's no longer the case. You can do it once in the beginning, you can walk away from the install, and you can be almost guaranteed it will finish successfully. Okay, Pix Fill. This is a good one to talk about. So previously, if we had a generator situation, and we had, you know, maybe a generator creating 100 pix, we actually want to kind of fill that out to 400. You know, like if 400 is how long of our physical output is on our pixel controller, we might want to fill that with dummy pixels so that we have a consistent length. Previously, we would do that with a cutoff and a cutoff fill, but that actually has changed. So now generators work a little bit differently. The cutoff will cut off this particular generator from going past 512, but we're not going to have that issue because 100 is currently all we're trying to generate. And you'll notice up here we'll have 100 pix being generated. That's because the generator is generating 100 and it's being told to not go past 512. However, the fixture itself has, okay, let's go ahead and say we have one more hull, and this hull, let's go ahead and set a couple things differently here. So we'll do 0, 1. We'll duplicate that generator and we'll do 1, 2. So we have two generators and both of them are generating 100 pix. And each generator is being told not to go past 512 on its own accord. So in the fixture itself, you'll have an option called pixfill, and this is off by default. If you turn this on, you'll notice that whatever your generators are creating, it gets filled all the way to this value here. So right now this is set to 500. So if we set this to 500, I'm sorry, it was 512. If we set it to 500, no matter what our generator is set to, it will always be 500 in total. And if we go into pix mode, you'll notice that we have a whole bunch of pix stacked up on the very last coordinate, and that is because it takes the last pix and it duplicates it until it gets to your target length. So if you have something like a teensy or a pixelite where every physical output needs to be of a set length, you would want to turn on pixfill and set this to 400 or 500 or whatever it is, so that each of your fixtures, regardless of how much you are actually generating, ends up being the same length. And this is helpful for serial devices because it has to be that way, and for things like Artnet where it doesn't have to be that way, it's still useful because in the channel monitor, if you're editing offsets, you can now place your fixture knowing exactly how long it is with the dummy pixels accounted for as well. So very useful. Okay, almost through here. So we increased the limit for generating lights from pix selection from 10 to 32. Probably not something you'll ever run into. Fixture device ID can now go above 64. It was capped at 64 before. Previously, you could not make more than 100 primitive objects. Now you can make 1,000. And some stuff in the back end was updated to allow for pix storage to kind of be a little bit more efficient and just done differently. And that's not something that will really impact you in any way, but useful to know if you run into any issues with pix disappearing. Do let me know because it's probably related to that bug or that task. Okay. Fixes. So let's just fly through these real quick. We had an issue with Artnet and streaming ACN override where it was off by 1. So if you had data coming in on universe 10, it would show up on universe 11 in GeoPix. So that's been fixed. There's a bug related to duplicating imported geometry. So if you imported a tree or a human and you duplicated it, sometimes that duplicate would take on a different mesh. So that's been fixed. The effects nodes in the I/O tab have all kind of had a consistent consistency pass applied where the timing parameters have been kind of redone and the speed inputs They all have speed inputs, and these now behave as you'd expect them to. So you can pulse this, and your speed will kind of move and then move and then move again. So, okay. We had a bug where dragging certain window headers would cause split screen stuff to all move at once. So, for example, if I moved this, it was actually the stuff like the channel monitor. Before, if you clicked and dragged here, you'd move the whole window. So that's been fixed. Let's see here. There's a bug with surfaces and masks getting swapped and reordered. That's been fixed. There's a bug with the FFT resolution not going lower to 128. That's been fixed. There was some bugs with the Player Commercial and Player Pro TD licenses that were not properly recording with the screen record feature, and now that's been fixed. Let's see here. Some optimization fixes to the Pixel Node S protocol. There were some issues in the I/O where importing stuff and duplicating stuff would kind of just cause a mayhem to happen. You'd have wires disconnected, connected to the wrong thing, and these are all bugs that have been fixed. The Pixel Node really, okay, so this is basically what I mentioned earlier. There's been some updates to the Pixel Node Wizard utility that prevents chunk size from being larger than it should. Some fixes to scheduler, loading data. We had some other issues with the scheduler where we delete an entry, but it would actually delete the wrong one. Corrupt some database stuff in the background. Fixed bug with streaming ACN mode. Yeah, so these are all mostly pretty straightforward, small stuff you may have not even run into on your own using of GeoPix. See if there's anything. Oh yeah, so Pix in orthographic camera mode would sometimes not be visible if you zoomed in too close. That's been fixed. There were some issues with Pix split and auto address offsetting that was fixed as well when you duplicate stuff. There were some issues with the fixture wizard recently that have been fixed in terms of lighting. And yeah, some issues with rendering. And oh yeah, there's an issue too where if you hit fit projector, it would take into account what you had in your scene, but also it would take into account this ghost pixel that was always at 0, 0, 0. So if your project was not around the center of the grid, you'd have kind of a weird looking projector map. And we fixed some icons not showing up. So that's pretty much it for this release. Build 20 is got a lot of different things going on. Build 21 is going to take probably 2 months to complete. And that's because we have some pretty big changes coming, and they're going to be good changes. We have kind of an overhaul to the Pix frame workflow, and also somewhat of an overhaul to the I/O and macro workflow. One of the issues is, editability and on-site kind of tweaking. It's very tedious to kind of make changes quickly and on the fly. And one of the problems that people keep running into, myself included, is when you have macros already saved, is making changes to those macros. It's very, very difficult. Loading them in is not ideal, and the I/O tab it needs some work in the back end so that macros are stored somewhere else. And the I/O tab, this graph viewport thing, is actually a viewer. It should basically point to the contents of a macro, and so you should be able to go in and out of macros quickly this way, and that's currently not the case. So changes to the I/O tab are going to help basically workflow issues and just speed up your general workflow a lot. In addition to that, there's going to be some changes to the way inputs and outputs are handled in GeoPix. Right now we have inputs that you can create inside of the I/O tab, and that's going to change, right? We have all of these managers, right? The MIDI manager, we have the OSC manager, all of these places where information comes into GeoPix. So all of these input locations will be consolidated into one panel, and you will be able to reference those global inputs in your I/O tab as you create your macros. And what this means is after you save the macro, you can go back and edit the inputs that you're selecting. So you can actually change if you have a slider, right, coming in from your perform mode, coming into a macro, and you save that macro, and then maybe later you change the name of that slider, or maybe you want to use some other information coming from a different source. You can change what inputs come into the macro without changing the insides of the macro. So that's also going to help workflow a lot. In addition to that, we have some big changes coming to how lighting fixtures are visualized. So right now we have the fixture wizard, which is very, very limited in terms of its visualization capabilities. Obviously, this is all you need to map lights, but if you don't have a light in front of you, it's very hard to tell what it's going to look like. So the best you can currently hope for is to link red, green, blue, pan, tilt. Those are the only channels really even somewhat supported. And you can move this light around, but there's lots of limitations here and issues. So the new workflow is actually going to be radically different. It's going to allow you to create a very simple profile or a very complex realistic profile, both in terms of a lighting profile and a geometric representation of that light. And so it's going to involve some new tools and new workflows, but the major plus is that you're going to be able to create these based off of a DMX spec sheet or a lighting profile that you know, and you can basically create that light, and you can basically import it in your scene and fully simulate your scene and your project in GeoPix, both in pixels, movers, and video. And that's going to be a huge unifying push to kind of tie all of these elements together in a way that you can trust way more. So you have that to look forward to as well. All right, well, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I guess it's more of a guide or a walkthrough, so please head over to the website and grab 20 and check it out. Let me know if you have any issues, find any bugs, or just have any ideas generally. I always love to hear those. Feedback is great, and until next time, thanks again.